Welcome to Improving Intimacy, a podcast to help single and married Latter-day Saints strengthen their family connections and marriages. Daniel A. Burgess is the host of Improving Intimacy. Daniel's a marriage and family therapist, father, husband, and author. Here's Daniel on this episode of Improving Intimacy.
Welcome to another episode of Improving Intimacy. On today's episode, we have Sarah Chapman, who is an author, and we're excited to review her book with her today and kind of learn her journey to getting to this book. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. I appreciate this. This is really exciting.
I'm very excited. As somebody who's writing a book, I also want to kind of selfishly learn your journey. Mine's been a very difficult one. And so I may get a little selfish in my inquiries here, but more importantly, I'm curious to hear more about you. Who are you as a wife, as a person, as a mother? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you to this point.
Sure, love to. Trent and I, my husband and I, will be going on 19 years of marriage this September. I have 5 children. I currently live in Utah. We lived in California for a time, actually, in San Diego area, actually. Missed that place for sure. I first, basically, I grew up in an LDS home, and I grew up in a family with 8 children, and I'm 6 of 8. And I just basically, in our home, we didn't talk about anything remotely close to our bodies. We were very surface type of family. We didn't really talk about hard things. I wouldn't say that we were an authentic family, but at the same time, I did feel loved by my parents, and I felt that they were providing me a really great education, secularly as well as spiritually. And so I didn't feel like I was necessarily neglected in the way I was thinking. However, growing up as a teenager in the 90s, I would run around with some friends who were sexually active, and being the naive young teenager that I was, I kind of looked at them and viewed them as people who were naughty girls, right? And so I remember, church lessons here and there. Wasn't very often, but I do remember those specific metaphors that were shared. I actually did get the chewed up piece of gum kind of analogy, which maybe a lot of your audience here might have gotten.
Yeah.
And then I also just really created a lot of, I would just look at the word sex and just immediately think that it was just this dirty thing. However, there was also this other part of me that was being told that it was this sacred thing and you don't talk about it, right? And so I was just kind of like this back and forth in my head about like, what is this? And so, sure, I had boyfriends in high school, and I do remember like getting close a couple times where I feel like my body was in a state of arousal. Obviously, I didn't know what it was because I didn't know my body then. But looking back, I'm like, oh, that's what that tingling sensation was when I was getting close to that boy. Oh, okay, right. I can say that now. But at the time as a teenager, I didn't at all. And I never, like when I would shower and stuff, like I would just hurry and shower really quick and then get out. I never wanted to self-pleasure or anything at all. I didn't even know my body. And so come the time of marriage, the night before I'm to be married, my mom thinks it's a great time to talk about sex. So she pulls me aside and she basically asked me, what's going to happen tomorrow night, right? And I was like, well, I guess. I mean, I kind of remember my teenagers back in high school telling me that a penis goes inside a vagina, but then I was like, would like plug my ears, like, no, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this. And so I'd just kind of ignore what they were going to really tell me. And so I knew just that fact that a penis goes into a vagina, and that was it. And so my mom was like, well, here's a book. Go ahead and read this book. And it was the book from, is it called Between Husband and Wife by Lamb, Dr. Lamb?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was that book. And I was like, Mom, like, I don't have time to read this book. And she's like, well, you'll eventually, refer back to it. And that was it. That was my sex talk from my mom. And so I was just basically thrown into fire the night of my wedding. It was very traumatic and very long, exhausting night, as any honeymooners, right, could imagine, who had never had sex before, trying to figure things out and try to figure out our bodies, right? So anyway, it's just a mess. And I called my mom like the next day, just like in tears, like, I just got married and this has happened to me. I didn't go into details with her because we don't talk about details or anything like that. But I really wanted to, like, it was like this cry for help. Like, why didn't you tell me these things? Like, why didn't you help me to understand how my body works in this way and that it's supposed to be designed for this? Anyway, so, and that's just kind of like the cycle that happened for basically the first 16 years of my marriage. And that was the only thing we really thought about in our marriage was sex. It wasn't money or anything. It was always about sex. And
You
my
mean,
husband was always
the issues were always around sex?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, issues around sex. And so he would always try to approach me and help to try to fix me, right? Because of course he wanted a decent experience too. But at the same time, I was looking at him like, oh, well, this is all you want. Like, you just want my body. And that was it. And so I viewed myself as this tool for him.
So let me pause you right there. What you just stated was big. It was huge. So you viewed yourself as a tool for him to get satisfied. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was because
I never I never wanted to receive that pleasure for myself because I, once again, thought of it was like I was a bad girl if I did that, right? And so even when I did have an orgasm, I'd immediately feel guilty every single time afterwards because of this like shame that I had created in my head about me having pleasure. And so then I viewed him, oh, he's just using my body, and sex is for him, and orgasm is something that he just needs all the time.
So I want to explore that a little bit if you're okay with it. I know you bring it up in indirect ways. In fact, in your book, Underneath It All, and I apologize to the audience, I didn't mention the name of your book. It's Underneath It All, You're Naked. I love that title, by the way. I think it's excellent. And your subtitle is Shedding Light on Misconceptions About Sex from a Christian's Wife to a Christian Woman. But what you said right there was you couldn't allow yourself to experience pleasure. If you're okay with that, let's explore that a little bit more. You're not the first to say this on my podcast, and I hear it a lot from the clients. What did it mean to you to experience pleasure? You're married now. You knew clearly beforehand that, or at least your value system says, before marriage, I'm not going to experience this. You're saying you jump in the shower, you get out as fast as you can because you didn't want to self-stimulate or do anything wrong. Yep. So now you're married. What was the barrier for you in allowing yourself to experience that joy?
Well, I think you're basically asking what kind of shifted that focus for me.
Well, what continued? So, a lot of men will get into a relationship. Yeah, they know they're not supposed to have pleasure before marriage, but now they're in marriage and they're willing to let it all go. Kind of the dynamic that you just explained with you and your husband. But what prevented you? I guess maybe, is it a shift? I guess that's a question I'm asking you. Is it a shift, or it seemed more like though you carried this perspective? I'm not allowed to have sexual pleasure even in marriage, which seems incongruent with the thoughts and beliefs you had before marriage. What was the barrier to? I mean, you saw your husband having pleasure. did that pique your interest to say, how can I have that pleasure? Or was it this continued, I can't have this. It's too shameful. It's too hurtful.
No, it was definitely, it was too hurtful to me. And I just, I would just lay there. I always like to say I lay there like a dead fish. Maybe you've heard that term before, but I would just allow him to just do whatever he wanted to my body. And you know, I was really good at faking orgasms. I I was definitely something just to get him off me as soon as I could, right? Because I just felt dirty the whole time. I was like when he was on me, like it was just. It's amazing how much conditioning that I had created in my head, and this belief that just really ate away at my soul, just to like know that this shame enveloped my whole body and created a wedge in my marriage, to where I looked at him as somebody that just used me, you know?
So I'm really curious, what took you from that experience to what you say on page 56 is this idea of being able to embrace it very differently, practice patience, self-compassion, and have a sense of humor about it. That seems like a complete 180 shift. What was the journey you had from what you were experiencing, that pleasure is painful and icky, to this wonderful perspective of even having a sense of humor about it? What led you there?
Well, it's not an overnight thing. I'll just say that right now. It definitely was, you know, I had this moment, this wake up call, you know, 16 years in, I was fed up. I mean, I just kept basically like, telling myself over and over and over, Sarah, why can't you figure this out? Why is this so hard for you? Why can't you just get over this? Like, why do you look at sex in this perspective and just this why, right? And so I finally had this moment of surrender, and I didn't talk to anybody, Daniel. Like, I suffered in silence for years. I didn't talk to my sisters, definitely not my mom, right? Not even my girlfriends, nobody.
That's what we're taught. We're not taught to even talk to our loved ones about it, even our spouse.
Exactly. And so, of course, and then Trent would ask me, my husband would ask me, what is it that you want? And I'm like, well, I don't know what I want. I've never allowed myself to have conversations and to talk about it. And then he would just ask me question after question to open my mind to see the possibility. And then I'd shut him down all the time, right? It was just this constant battle. So finally, it was just this one day, I call this Suzanne. I refer to her in my book a lot. She was this woman who I met randomly in Guatemala, of all places. And like, I just look back and I'm like, it was by divine design that I was to meet her that summer of 2017, so that she could open my eyes.
I actually love what you said about Suzanne, is that she started her journey because of romance novels.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I'm not a big romance novel kind of girl, but you know, some people are. And so anyway, we got to talking. We literally were, our Airbnbs were like literally across from each other. And I didn't know Spanish. She didn't know Spanish. It was a Sunday afternoon. We had nothing else to do. So we got to know each other. And we literally, like, she just opened up to me and was basically like, we talked about our sex lives, and this was the very first time I'm like, this is a really fun conversation. It was the first time I actually looked at it with clear eyes to see the potential in me and the hope, because she had already kind of gone through her own little journey, and because she was basically me, and so she gave me hope to like look at it with a different set of eyes. And so I went from this place of, and this is where I talk a lot about in my book, this view of, you know, going from a judgment place to being more curious. And so she allowed me, and she gave me permission. It's interesting how us women, we need permission, you know?
What I'm curious though is, what was it about Suzanne that allowed you to open up? You had been fighting this for so many years.
Yeah.
What prevented you from putting up just another berries? Nope, I can't talk about that. That's betraying my husband. That's betraying myself. What was it about her that allowed you to open up? I think that's the biggest thing with women is finding that opportunity and how, because they get into the same place where I can't talk about this and I won't talk about it. I don't care how familiar I am with you. So what was it about her?
Well, one of the things that I had been studying and learning about, I love Brene Brown. And at that point in my life, I'd really been learning a lot about vulnerability and authenticity. And when she just started talking to me and exposing herself to me, I was like, she gave me permission to therefore share some of my things, right? And so there's power when you can start a conversation and be like, I'm messed up, here's all these parts of me that I don't understand. Can you help me kind of walk through this? And that's what she was for me, and I think that's what really created that safe place for me. She was like my safe place. And because we could relate on so many levels, right? And so I think when there's vulnerability and authenticity in any friendship or relationship, there's definitely power behind that to be able to know, hey, I'm not alone. We can do this together, and I feel like that's kind of what I've been doing now. It's here's my mess, and I'm creating it into a message and helping other women to understand, you're not alone. You're not broken. There's hope for you. And I think that's what's beautiful about this. And that's what made that shift for me, is to allow myself to just open up, receive the information from this trusted, quick trusted friend, right? Because I just met her, and just share all of me with her. It was quite an experience, that's for sure.
So it sounds like Brene Brown gave you that courage, that platform, or not platform, kind of that foundation that it's okay to be vulnerable here. But what I think is important for the audience to be aware of is you're still really new in your journey. This was very recently. So you went on that trip back in, if I remember right, 2017?
2017.
So you're only 3 years into this.
Yeah.
That is phenomenal. You cranked out a book and sharing your journey. So emotionally, what is it like for you right now? So kind of step away from the book and this narrative. You really are in the context of people who are learning themselves. You're really at the beginning of this journey. So emotionally, what are you going through right now?
Emotionally, I mean, just, when I started it, I just consumed as much information as I could. I finally got to this place where I could.
Do you feel like you're a lot more confident, or you feel like you still have a lot of insecurities or vulnerabilities around it? Where do you feel like you're at?
Yeah, I totally feel confident in my sexuality now, and I can say that. I wouldn't say 100% for sure. I'm still learning and growing, and I think that's what's great about just understanding our sexuality, because it's going to always evolve and change, because there's just more things we're going to find out about ourselves. But oh man, just to think about where even 2 years ago to where I am now, and being able to have emotional connection with my husband, and him understanding how me as a woman, how I work, and he takes the time to emotionally connect with me before even getting into the bedroom, and understanding how my body needs to go through this, sexual response cycle, which I talk about that in my book. And there's a lot of, therapists out there that talk about the different sexual response cycles that we go through, right?
Exactly.
And just understanding that.
So you've given yourself permission to get here so that you can help your husband understand your body, because in the past, he's asking what you want. And as you said, there is a dead fish. Just finish it out. That I think is critical. Like I posted in our Improving Intimacy group today, this idea of, especially with women, okay, I given myself permission. Now it's scary. Was it scary to give yourself permission? Were you afraid of what you would discover?
Oh yeah. Yes. So, of course, we're going to have those fears. That's part of kind of like our human nature, especially when we've created so much judgment and shame around it. There's going to be fear that comes up. And there's definitely going to be, things that we might come across we don't quite understand, or we definitely judge really quickly, right? Masturbation being one of them for me. Like, that was a huge, I didn't want to enter that specific subject until I felt comfortable in my body first, and like learning the anatomy of my body first, before I could venture into that. So I feel like it's like a series of like stepping stones you kind of have to evolve into and work into. And as I started reading all these books, that's kind of what happened. Is after I met with Suzanne, she gave me a couple books to read, and from there I just like took off. Like, I was thirsting for knowledge for the first time in sex. And once I read one book, I went to the next book, and then I went to the next book, and just reading so much content I could get my hands on. And it was just this like basically cry for help, and just learning on my couch from all different kinds of therapists and sex experts and human sexuality professors and so many things. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I'm finally in a place where I can receive this. And yes, there's going to be content out there. Once again, that you just kind of have to like pick and choose. I don't know, like what resonates with you.
I think that's, I want to ask you about that. But before I do,
sure.
I really appreciate you addressing briefly in your book about masturbation. And you give a context for it, the history behind it, the fears around it. What was that journey for you? You're addressing that fear. You're realizing, okay, I need to understand myself. Some wives feel like, I do need to figure out my body, but I will not do it without my husband present. What was it like for you? Did you find that it was more valuable to do it alone so you could do it without pressure, or was it important for you to explore that with your spouse?
So the beginning, I chose to explore with my husband, and it's still a work in progress, Daniel. Like, I'm still kind of like, I'm not fully 100% like going off by myself all the time. You know what I mean? But at the same time, like, it's kind of going back to the stepping stone thing. Like, I start with my husband just to understand and know and feel comfortable. And then, it's still just something that I know, that's the crazy part. Like, I know that it's beneficial for me to know what feels good and what doesn't,
Absolutely.
But then the shame just creeps in. And I remember this one specific time, I was like, okay, Sarah, like, I was seriously like coaching myself, like, okay, Sarah, we can do this. Like,
you're talking about when you're masturbating, you're trying to get into the headspace.
I'll go and I'll coach myself, and like, I'll breathe and everything. Like, a really great book, Slow Sex, was really powerful for me, by the way.
Okay.
Just
excellent,
breathing.
Excellent book. I think a lot of, so we're speaking to an LDS audience or a Christian-based audience. Sometimes that book isn't received very well. She talks about a lot of, so the audience, it's an excellent book. Yeah. It does venture into some concepts and ideas that I think are extremely helpful, but be aware. It is not a warning, but just be aware. You're not going out and getting, an LDS book on how to understand your own sexuality. It's a very raw and in-depth book. Excellent.
Yeah.
So I think so that kind of leads me to my second question, or where we left off before I asked this question, was so there's so many resources out there. Often when people start to explore this route, they stay, they kind of follow that insecurity by staying on a very safe path of resources. I don't want to name any books. I don't want anybody to feel like they're being judged around it, but
sure.
How did you, so for example, like Emily Nagoski, that's not an LDS author. How did you determine which books were good for you? Whether it's Jennifer Finland's Fife or Natasha, what was your internal compass to decide this is helpful, this is good in my pursuit of my own sexuality, but being within the framework of my faith?
Sure. And this thing, when you go on Amazon, there's going to be all kinds of reviews from all over, right? And so, of course, I would read the reviews because that's what most people do when they go searching for a book. But also, of course, having my friend Suzanne, of course, had already read a few. So I kind of had a understanding from some of the things, right? But then there's also this, I did go and actually look them up, not just about their book, but just them as a person. And so I did some research on who they are and like, what are they teaching? What are they like out there? Like, what's their message kind of thing? And so then I felt more comfortable to kind of open up and peek. And of course, I'd go to my just city library, right? And go to the sexuality section and I just camp out and just kind of peruse books that way. That's also helpful because it's, free. It's not like I'm going to buy a book. But there's so many, like there's amazing people out there doing amazing things. And,
so I guess let me push a little bit on this is, for example, with slow sex, what kept you from reading that and saying, whoa, this is way outside of my value system. I shouldn't be reading this. I mean, we're talking about just 3 years ago. Here's Sarah, who's just now recognizing all the rigidity around your sexual understanding and lack of understanding with your sexuality.
Yeah.
What kept you from throwing that book aside and saying, this is horrible?
Well, I know this sounds really simple, but it's what I kept coming back to all the time, Daniel. It's this, Sarah, quit judging it. Be more curious.
Not simple at all. That is beautiful.
That's it. That's all, and that's what I had to tell myself all the time. Like, Sarah, you're looking at oral sex and you're judging it. How can I be more curious about how it can apply to me in my relationship, in my intimate relationship with my husband? Like, what does that look like? And so it really is simple, but it was so profound to me, and it's carried me the last 3 years. And that's why I really hone in on it in my book, that it's like waking up women to understand, quit judging it so much.
Absolutely,
and look at
love
it from a place of curiosity.
And I think you see that journey as you go through this, like starting in, what chapter is this? Page 100 or so. You start talking about loving yourself from the inside out, and you do a full inventory. What do I like? Yeah. What am I insecure about? I'm putting some of my own words to this, but you take the individual through this process, and I think that's key, absolutely key. So yes, the answer is simple, but boy, the process can be painful. And that's something I actually warn my clients when I do this similar type of self-inventory. I have them often review themselves. Where did they start? I like the word you used. Stop judging it and just learn from it. And I have people start to do this, is stop judging your body. In fact, look at yourself. You think you have a fat tummy. Who told you that? Who defined that for you? Who took away your agency to keep you from actually looking at yourself and the way you should? Who defined it? And they'll go through this emotional process. Oh my goodness, that first boy I dated, he made fun of me or he poked me in the tummy. And ever since then, I've been insecure. I'm not going to let that dude take away from my agency. I'm going to choose how to view my body. And you kind of do a similar thing here. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So this is actually my second book. I wrote a book 5 years ago called MindStrength for Women, and it was all about just loving ourselves and overcoming this idea that we're not enough and we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, and all these things, right? Of course, at that time I learned a lot about myself, and so the crazy part to that whole story was I felt amazing, and went through, a physical change, emotional change, and all these other things. But I kept sex hidden up in the corner, in this closet, And so when I actually brought sex into the light, right, now I felt like I've become this whole person, and I'm this whole unique being. And I talk about this term called sexy confidence in my book, and how as women, it's not so much, about our body or anything of that nature. It's how do we walk into a room and how do we make people feel? What kind of energy are we bringing into the room? Is this a loving environment? And this is where I kind of had to do this with my husband too, because when you're in the bedroom, as women, we start to, like, if we even put on a piece of lingerie or something, right? We start to immediately judge our body that it's not looking so amazing. And I talk about when I'm with women and stuff, I talk about this idea of, like, there's this way as women we get into serious judgment, but when we can come to learning to love ourselves from the way God sees us, because obviously that's important, that we can just be able to be at one with our husbands even, and not focus so much on the belly fat that's hanging out while we're trying to get on top of him, and just, like, think about how we can emotionally connect instead of, like, looking at our bodies and judging every nook and cranny that we don't like, kind of thing.
Love that.
So
now you jumped into something later on about how women need novelty. I thought this was interesting. I believe it. I'm one who likes to shatter myths out there, but the prevailing thought is men need novelty. Women want consistency. Tell me more about this. I think this is fascinating. I think I don't think anybody else is addressing it, and I've read a lot of books. So tell me a little bit about your discovery there.
Yeah. Well, I think also too, I do believe that women, we do need novelty. We just don't think we need it. I don't know if that makes sense. We do love,
Yes.
We like change. Like, I don't like the same position every time. I mean, anybody else? Once I actually yes, I did missionary position for years. Trust me, I know. Right. But now that I've educated myself and I've found other ways to, what they quote unquote spice up the bedroom, right? I actually do thrive on change in the bedroom. It keeps the spark alive and it creates more novelty,
Well, I think that's important because I think a lot of men get criticized because they want something new, and that's scary for their partners. But you're realizing part of the problem is you wanted it to be changed up. You wanted it exciting. You wanted it novel. And I think that's part of the discovery for a lot of women, and discovering their desire is, wow, I'm realizing I'm not as vanilla as I thought I was. Yeah. Where will this end? Were you concerned with that? Did you feel like you were going to go into desires and passions and things that were forbidden for you, or what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. Well, of course, at the beginning, because, my shame was still enveloped around me in certain points where it would rise up, but then I would have to open my eyes, like, Sarah, quit judging it again, but at the same time, like, I realized, like, how we can add just more experiences that we haven't had necessarily before in this, like, the safety of our own, like, couple relationship.
Just going back to the concept of not judging it and allow it to flow naturally. Yeah. As Emily Nagoski says, don't put on the brakes. Just.
Yeah. The brakes. I love that analogy too. Oh my gosh. Don't put on the brakes. Keep the accelerator going, because, sometimes you don't know if you're even going to like it. Right. And so quit judging that you're not going to like it before you even start it. Right. And allow yourself to receive. Okay. That's another thing. Oh my gosh. As women, we give all day long to everybody and everything all the time. Right. And so when I was like, Sarah, you deserve to receive. You get to receive pleasure. You get to receive these different avenues of novelty. And this is okay for you. Like, once again, I've had to coach myself. I do this like mental, inventory in my head before I have sex with my husband. Like, Sarah, we can do this. It's fine. Like, this is something that we've talked about. We've had discussions about this. We feel comfortable that this is something we want to choose to do and explore. And let's be open to that. So, yeah, I'm really good at coaching myself now.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like you've come a long way in just 3 years. I like the other concept that you shared about sex drives, desire level. The differences aren't the problem. Share with the audience what you meant by that.
Differences aren't the problem. We label ourselves when we first get married. Now, like, as I've learned, not all men are higher desire partners. Okay. Right. And
not at all. Right.
Right. And so we are really quick to label who's higher, who's lower, and, do you want me to quote books in here?
You absolutely tell your story. Yep.
One of the books, Passion Paradox. Have you heard of that book?
Actually, no, I haven't read, nor have I heard of it.
I'm trying to think of the author right now, but it's an old book. It's old. But anyway, there's this, and he talks about this whole idea of passion, because sometimes, like, as women, we label ourselves as lower desire, say that we are, right? And then we view the partner as the higher desire. But there's different ways of expressing and showing passion to each other. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just like a sexual thing. Sometimes in different seasons of our life, we kind of ebb and flow and, go from one extreme to another or something, and I think this whole idea that we put labels is unfortunate, because I chose to give myself that label for all those years, and I clung on to it. And I would just view my husband like, you just want sex all the time, and I'm just going to sit here and just kind of vent to you that I don't want to have it because I've already labeled myself that I don't want it.
As opposed to learning how to meet the needs of each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that theme is so important throughout your book. I refer to it as breaking the culture of sexual silence. And I love that you hit on it throughout the entirety of your book, especially, I believe, in chapter 14, talking about, even if I don't know a lot about it, talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about everything you know about sex and become comfortable with it. That is so important. As you learned early on with your mom and with other friends, you couldn't talk about. And that is one of the biggest desire killers and barriers to education. So learning how to break that culture of silence around sexuality, even when you don't know fully what you're talking about, start to share. That's what we do as kids. We talk about things we don't know. And then parents correct us. People inform us. You go into it non-judgmentally. Again, another thing that you carry throughout the book. Absolutely wonderful. You want to tell us a little bit about what that was like for you is you realize you're in this process, you're learning. What were some of the fears, hesitations, or positive experiences you had with sharing freely your knowledge?
Okay. So, I'm reading all these books, right? And I'm consuming everything that I could. And I remember always just like walking out, like in public, in Target or wherever. And I'm seeing all these women and I'm like, oh, if they only knew, right? And like, there's a point where, because I truly believe, I've obviously come to a place where and you see in my book, I'm a realist. Like, I really share the dark sides of me and my hangups and everything, and I'm okay with it. I've come to the place where I don't have this fear of judgment, what other people might think of me, because I've realized that the more I share, the more respect I get from other people. And so as I was reading all these things and I'm going out into the public and I see all these women and I'm just wondering, I'm like, I wonder if she was like me, because I'm now in, I don't really it's hard for me sometimes to even take myself back even 3 years ago to where I was, because I'm just so much more happier now. But sometimes I have to take myself there so that I can be, relatable to other women, right? So, of course, in our LDS culture, I have definitely, I've lost friendships. I'll be honest.
What do you mean? I think I know what you're talking about there, because I've
Yeah,
experienced the same. But share with the audience what that means. Just because you're being passionate and open about sexuality, you lost
yeah,
friends? What happened there?
yeah. So, just in small conversations sometimes, or I might have written like a post or something on Facebook about a book that I was reading, and then it just rubs somebody the wrong way, And I've actually had a few friends who have vocally come and told me um, that they don't agree with what I'm talking about and learning about, and that's fine. And it was, of course, that hard to hear, because it's like a blow. It's like this form of rejection that you don't want to ever experience in your life. But at the same time, there was like 30 plus women behind me, like saying, thank you. I learned so much from you. And so it's just our human nature to cling on to those one or two people that give you that negative comment, right? Um, but it's definitely propelled me to keep sharing, because I know how my life has changed because of it, and my marriage has changed because of it, and I can't deny it. And so as I've opened up about it, and talked to people within my neighborhood or community, like I just know that I am making strides with people. And I'm actually just yesterday, I had a friend who has finally come around. I've been talking to her for like since I started reading books, and just recently she's like, Sarah, I think I'm ready, you know? And you just have to kind of wait for those people to come around, and they will eventually, and they'll realize just how powerful this can be when they can open and be more curious to see what their life can be like if they chose to look at it in with a different perspective. So, so
Absolutely.
yeah,
In other words, you're not pushing your
no,
narrative. People know what you know
no,
because
yeah,
you're open about it, and you're waiting for them to come and seek you
yeah,
out. That's excellent.
exactly. And just gonna wait for them, and whenever they're ready, I'll be there with open arms to teach them and to guide them through their own experience. Like, the crazy part is, I have no desire to be a sex therapist like yourself, or go and be a professor or anything of that nature. Like, I just love learning about it. And so I feel like, I don't know, I guess people can kind of resonate more with a girl off the street, I guess, first. And then I can guide them to therapists or whoever else they need help with, right? Because I obviously don't have all the tools, but I'm their starting point. And that's what I love about, me being open about it, is that I can be their starting point, and then they can move from there to seek more professional help if they need it.
Absolutely. What a wonderful theme that you've carried out through the book. I think it's been wonderfully done. I think you've communicated well. As we wrap up here, are there anything else about the book or your experiences that you feel is important for the audience to know about you and your journey, or maybe possibly the journey that they're going through?
Oh yeah. Just the book in and of itself, it just breaks down so many things. Out there in the audience, you might have someone who feels like that they are broken, right? Or they feel like that there's no hope in their marriage. We didn't even touch on porn. That's a whole nother enchilada in and of itself.
So I held off on that because I love that you refer to porn the way you did in your book, as a compulsion, as a temptation, as a potential device in the marriage, or divisiveness in the marriage. And I love the language that you used in there. And I would be interested in exploring that a little bit more if you like. You want to tell us a little bit more about it and why you included it?
Yeah. Well, obviously, from personal experience, it was not me, it was my husband, right? I think it's just, he actually, I remember the day, and I'm sure a lot of men and women here can remember the day that their spouse came to them with this news, right? Or they found out in some other way, right? That'll be a day that you won't ever forget. But that day he came and approached me, and it was during this time I had finished writing my first book. And I was, like I said before, I was in a really good place and just felt pretty good about life because I was working on myself. And I think that's what's key here in this chapter, particularly as whether man or woman, right, is really focus on what are you doing in the relationship? What can you do to better yourself, to become a better version of yourself? And that's kind of where I was at that point, luckily. And that's when Trent felt comfortable to actually approach me and tell me about his porn addiction. Because, he has these fears that I would leave him, all these things, right? Like everybody might have. And he came and he told me, and it was just, this gut-wrenching kind of feeling. And the first questions that came into my mind, what's wrong with me? Why does it feel like you have to do this? I can't believe he's done this. He's this amazing man. How did porn get a hold of him, kind of thing. And so back then I was doing a lot of video journaling. And so after he told me, I just was like, okay, just hold on a second. I need to go into my closet and kind of think about this. So I went to my closet, and for 10 minutes, I just kind of just like talked to myself, and just basically just went through in my head what I had just heard. But it's interesting. I still have this video and I treasure it, but you'll notice you won't notice because you're not watching it, but in the first 5 minutes, I'm just like processing, like, why him, why me, everything, right? This pity party. And then the last 5 minutes, I just kind of make this shift. And it was God telling me, Sarah, he's a son of God. And that's all I heard. And I knew that I needed to walk with him in this journey. I wasn't out to fix him because I can't fix him, right? But I can walk with him to, figure out how to help him navigate, and how to get the help that he needed, kind of stuff. And so that was once again, it's a simple thing, but that was the one thing that really carried me through that experience, was just recognizing that he's a son of God, and together we can work through this porn addiction and we can come out on top. And we definitely have. And it's been an incredible experience. But there's definitely been pain. It hasn't been easy, but there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel.
A lot of people are listening and saying, okay, yeah, you just shared, he just dumped this big thing on you. And if I remember right, you even equate pornography to adultery or cheating on the relationship. Yeah. Am I remembering correctly? That's a very big view to have, one that generally is very divisive in a relationship. And you also refer to it as an addiction. And if anybody's been in my group, they know how sensitive I am about that terminology. And you actually went and learned a lot from Cameron Staley about mindfulness, which is not an addiction approach. It's a very mindful approach, which is very much in harmony with the theme of your book. Non-judgmental, non-rigid around these things, but being more mindful and self-aware. Which is
self-awareness is huge. Yeah.
And I think that led you to this, because usually the concepts of addiction don't lead you into the direction that you're talking about. In fact, it leads you in a very opposite direction. But I love that mindfulness, and fortunately meeting up with Cameron or whatever you learned from him, it led you to this idea. And one of the concepts that you shared there was, and I'm going to put it in my terminology, I don't view sex as a punishment or a reward. I view it as communication. And you talk about there, yes, it's not your fault. And you, as the wife,
Yes.
you're not responsible for his behavior. However, why are you punishing him by not giving him sex? Is that because of your insecurity? I realize I'm butchering your words. I'm putting them in mine. But, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting your train of thought there, but you're saying embrace them. Don't withhold sex because of maybe your
That's
insecurities.
the worst thing you could do.
Absolutely.
Is to withhold it.
Absolutely. Although giving him sex, you shouldn't have this expectation now he's going to be safe. You know, in fact, I think you pointed that out, if I remember right, is you said something like, okay, I'm going to give him all, because some women do that. I'm going to give him all the sex he needs. So he avoids
Then he
it.
won't even go look. Yeah.
And that's a reward or a punishment approach as opposed to communication and connecting. And so ironically, taking that other approach of withholding or giving too much is very much objectification and divisive in the relationship. It's not connecting. And so I love that you embrace that idea of it's not my responsibility, but I'm not going to miss this opportunity to connect with my partner. And because I view porn in this context, whatever it is, I'm not going to let that get in my way with connecting with my partner. I thought that was beautiful.
Yep. Yeah. Just finding that middle ground. And I mean, I remember coming home and asking anything I could about porn because I had no idea what that world was like. None. And so it blew my mind to see like, wow, I really don't know anything. But at the same time, like, let's come together and have conversation to see like how we can navigate this new normal, come to a middle ground to connect. I mean, this could be a whole nother podcast, but that definitely, that experience, I mean, it didn't take me on my sex journey because I found out about this like probably like five years ago.
You mean his use of porn?
Yes, his use of porn. And so there was still a couple of years in between there where I was just trying to like, you know, our communication was better. It wasn't the best as it is now, but we were definitely communicating, and I wasn't the one that was like, you know, denying him and like that kind of thing, because I was kind of understanding how, you know, I needed to create this middle ground to see how we can evolve into something better. And so then when I finally accepted like, okay, I need to work on my sexuality, then that took us to a whole nother level. And he's been amazing. And it's like he doesn't have those compulsions anymore. And even if he does, he comes and talks to me about it, you know? And so we've created a very healthy relationship in regards to porn. So,
Sarah, that is wonderful. I would actually really love having you on again at a future time to talk about that. Again, the book is Underneath It All, You're Naked. Wonderful theme throughout the book. I think you did an amazing job with it, and I think the audience would really benefit from it. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you letting me have an opportunity to share my story. It's always something I like to talk about.
Oh, clearly.
Changed my life. Like, literally changed my life.
Yeah, and your journey has been
saved me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah.
You're welcome.